Welcome to Front Page by AIM Network, your one-stop destination for everything AI and tech. Here are the top headlines for the day. OpenAI has now hit a $500 billion valuation after a $6.6 billion secondary share to investors including SoftBank, Stripe Capital, and Rowe Price, and overtaking SpaceX's $400 billion valuation. Former OpenAI CTO Mira Murati's new lab has launched its first product called Tinker. It's a Python API that abstracts away distributed GPU complexities while giving researchers granular control over fine-tuning and RL pipelines. And then Anthropic has appointed former Stripe CTO Rahul Patil, an Indian origin infrastructure veteran with stints at AWS, Oracle, and Microsoft to lead engineering, inference, and security as the company restructures its tech core amidst Claude 300x user surge, $5 billion revenue milestone, and the global AI infrastructure race. And the Stripe connection does not stop here. Back home in India, Bengaluru-based Vaani AI Research, co-founded by Tushar Shinde, has raised $400,000 in a pre-seed round led by VCs with global investors from Meta, Apple, Sony Pictures, and Oliver Wyman, backing its bold vision to become the Stripe for voice AI. And here goes our first news for the day. Vaani AI raises $400,000 in a pre-seed fund. In 2024, three founders from IISc and IIT Madras quietly started building a voice-first platform. Skeptics thought voice AI infra was too crowded and too hard to scale. And fast forward to 2025, Vaani AI Research just raised $400,000 in a pre-seed round. It was led by VCs with global investors from Meta, Apple, Sony Pictures India, Oliver Wyman, and VAT Group backing the vision. And Vaani calls itself the Stripe for voice AI. And it's not just another chatbot layer, but APIs, SDKs, and enterprise-grade voice AI models that help businesses deploy human-like and multilingual voice agents in days and not months. So this is the infrastructure for voice, built to scale payments infra that it did a decade ago. So Vaani AI is tackling the hardest problems in voice AI. And this includes multilingual fluency for India and the Gulf markets. Then you have low latency response times for real-life conversations. And you have expressive models with emotional resonance beyond flat TTS. And the team is already developing a next-gen text-to-speech model that they claim will surpass global benchmarks in naturalness and emotion. And the conversational AI market is projected to cross $47 billion by 2030. So Vaani is zeroing in on a $150 million addressable market in India and the GCC across sectors like BPO, fintech, healthcare, and education, where multilingual, human-like voice agents can be game changers. And VCs have promised to plug Vaani into its nationwide network and global partnerships to drive its enterprise adoption. It's also selected for the Google for Startups AI Accelerator in 2025, and Vaani AI is a part of NASSCOM's Gen AI Foundry and many more such programs. Simply put, Vaani is earning credibility from India's top accelerators and global AI platforms. So, joining us today on Front Page for the first time is Tushar Shinde. He's the co founder of Vaani AI Research. Tushar brings a decade of experience spanning across AI infrastructure, product engineering, and research that translates into scalable platforms. And along with his co founders from IISc and IIT Madras, he is betting big on making India the global hub for voice first AI. And at Vani, Tushar is building the infrastructure layer for voice, which they call the Stripe for voice AI. So, welcome to Front Page, Tushar. Congrats on the funding, and kudos to you and your team for building the infrastructure layer for voice. And once again, I'd like to mention the Stripe for voice AI. So, how does it feel to be on Front Page Live TV, Tushar? Let's begin with the a Q&A to start your journey.
Hey, absolutely, Supreet. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, Tushar, I'd like to start off with the investor confidence in your journey. So, your pre seed round brought in not just venture catalysts, but also global operators from Meta, Apple, Sony Pictures, and Oliver Wyman. So, what do you think resonated most with these investors about Vani's vision and the tech stack? And also, how do you balance thinking of building at scale while still being in the early stages?
Right, absolutely. So, actually, what stood out was the approach that we're trying to take from grounds up. Because, see, there are only few ways that you could build voice agents today, and voice is a very richer form of communication. And not now, but in 10 years from now, you will see a lot of transformations coming out, specifically in the voice sector. A ton of people building personal voice assistants, maybe voice first app journeys. There are tons of applications in the call centers. But the only way to build voice agents today, which is a cascading structure where you try to just stitch a couple of APIs together, is mostly based on the Western models. Now, when you're trying to build on a Western model, the data biases that they have must be seeping in everything and anything that you're building on top of it. So there was always a gap for somebody to build the infrastructure from grounds up. And whenever I say infra, that could be models, that could be a lot of research, that could be the infra, that could be a lot of tooling around it. So somebody has to take that effort to build it grounds up. And I think that's what resonated the most with venture capitalists and as well as the other investors that we have on board.
Right. I'm glad you touched those topics. And Tushar, I'd like to know about the Stripe for voice AI analogy. That's something that we've spoken of multiple times. So many startups today call themselves the X for Y. But in your
Yeah.
case, what does it really mean to be called the Stripe for voice AI? And if you could unpack how your APIs, SDKs, and the tech stack, reduces the friction for developers and enterprises compared to the traditional voice AI solutions that we have today.
Well, great question. So let me take a step back in order to explain it properly to our audience. So before 1975, there were a lot of these mainframe computers, right? And
Correct.
when we entered into the personal computing era, which was more popularized by the Microsofts and the Apples of the world, it is a couple of folks sitting in the Silicon Valley. They made this GUI popular. Like they made all of the screens, the tons of softwares and tools that run on GUI or the interfaces where we so much interact with buttons, screens, and text. So this was all GUI based, and it was made popular by them because it had a high commercial value. But things don't need to be that way all the time, right? We are entering into the era where there are much better forms of communication. Even just to book a cab to go from, say, Marthali to HSR, you don't need to take the app out, Uber cab out, and select the source destination, select the type of cab you want, and do all of that stuff, right? All of that very, very efficiently could be done through voice. Till now, it could not happen because the technology was not at that level of sophistication. But things are changing. Most of it we are trying to change. There are a couple of really good people out there in the ecosystem who are building very good use cases and good apps on top of voice. And all of that indicates to the thing that voice is here to stay and a lot of transformation is also here to stay. Now, whenever we say Stripe for infra, voice infra,
Right.
what we mean by what Stripe did for payments. Like before Stripe, there were tons of companies like PayPal and tons of other payment gateway companies. But in order to build any sort of payment gateway where I can accept payments from cross borders, it was so hard The documentation was hard. There were tons of API. There was tons of stitching that you needed to do. There was a lot of transaction failures whenever you try to do that. An entire company, they usually lose their focus by running a business, and they typically get into just building this payment gateway integration. Stripe solved for that. So they built everything that was possible in order to make their lives easier. So something similar we're trying to do in voice. Today, the way people build voice agents is getting tons of things, tons of APIs from 10 different places, trying to stitch it together, running into performance issues. You don't have to do that. We will take care of that as an off-the-shelf offering. It's the black box. You take it. You build any sort of things that is possible on top of it. It could be a customer experience layer. It could be a call center use case. It could be an app. It could be tons of different things. And that is where I think this Stripe as an voice AI infra positioning comes in.
Right. Thanks for that, Tushar. And continuing along the lines of the tech behind Vani, so you're working on a production grade, low latency, and a multilingual voice model. So, what were some of the biggest technical bottlenecks that you are solving, whether it's for naturalness, emotional resonance, or scaling real time inference? And how are you
Right.
approaching the compute costs as your voice AI adoption ramps up?
Right. A lot of that are some of the technical details. Say, for example, we are trying to build a text to speech model, which is around 5 billion parameters with a vision to crack the benchmark set by 11 Labs. Now, 11 Labs has a couple of state of the art models when it comes to how expressive something is, how well it sounds, the emotions, the empathy behind all of those voices. Nobody in India was able to crack that. Like, of course, there are tons of very good startups with a very good funding, but the main problem is the data. So the problem with all of the Indian languages is these are low resource languages. You don't get data online when it comes to speech, even when it comes to text. You don't have that much of an annotated data, and there are only couple of things that you have at your disposal. There are projects like Bhashani or AI for Bharat, or IIC is one of the project called Vaani again. So these are like open source projects trying to get some sort of a speech data. Most of that data is narrational and not conversational in nature. Plus, that is mostly centered around Hindi. And the quality of that data is around 8 kilohertz. The sampling rate of that is around 8 kilohertz to 16 kilohertz. In order to build a good model, you need a higher sampling rate. And that is where this data constraints come into the picture. So if we are, if anybody in the ecosystem is willing to build a very good expressive TTS model, they'll need to solve the data problem first. And that is, I think, the exact problem that we had identified. For the last around 4 months, we have been in the process of partnering with different organizations, collecting data from a ton of different open source and closed source entities. We have collected, I think, almost around 15 TB of speech data so far. Now, that is also less when it comes to building a model out of it, but I think this is a good start. And once you solve and crack the data problem, then it comes to the actual architectural choices that you'll be making, and of course, a ton of training and the GPU and hardware cost that you run into. So we have a lot of these processes aligned, and hopefully, we'll be able to crack it as early as in next 4 to 5 months.
Right. We hope the same too. But Tushar, coming to the market strategy, so you've identified
Mhm.
both the India and the GCC
Right,
as a $150 million addressable market. So I'd like to
right.
understand why these regions first, and what do you see in these regions in terms of enterprise demand, or be it cultural nuances in multilingual voice, or the policy or the government adoption that make them ripe for Vani's expansion.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in fact, the funny thing is, in my personal opinion, I feel that the current penetration of voice AI that we have had is around 2 to 3%, and that is mostly dominated by call center use cases. But there are tons of things that you could build with voice. Everything that is dominated by digital systems today with GUI, at least 30 to 40% of that has a transformative potential to get into voice. And that is exactly what we are trying to do. So, it is not only about the existing market, but also the ever evolving market. So currently, just for the matter of fact, 90% of our current customer base and the potential pipeline that we have is inbound. That itself signals that there's a ton of demand in the market in India and GCC. People want to build a lot of use cases when it comes to customer support, lead qualification, lead engagement, consultation, retention. There are tons of use cases. And most of the problems, most of the models today, either they'd be very high cost or they'd be very high quality. It's always a trade off. There's not a single solution which can work in production which has both. And that is where what we're trying to do sounds more important. And we have a high belief that this is not the only smaller market that we're targeting. but also a lot of things which we sitting here today are not able to observe will eventually get into in next couple of years. So that is what we are betting big on.
Right. And besides your market strategy, with any new AI offering, customers, be it enterprises, big businesses, or even startups, they're often skeptical of how these solutions can be deployed in their product. Of course, there's a lot of risk of hallucinations or misaligned outputs. So at Vaani AI, how do you approach that, and how do you convince some of the more skeptical customers into adopting voice AI into their product and just help them realize that look, there's going to be a game changer in how your business operates?
Right, and of course that risk is always there. We have good set of examples where AI hallucinated and then caused some disaster with the customer engagement. So that is the first and foremost thing that we had in mind when we were designing the framework and the base architecture of it. Human in the loop, I would say, is one crucial part which most of the startups typically miss. It is not about replacing the contact center people or replacing that manpower with AI. What we are trying to bet big on is how do we augment this human power. So even if you go to our website and tons of social media pages, it is always a human shaking hands with AI. So what we are trying to do is powering a lot of humans with an augmentation of AI. So say for example, there are tons of say millions of calls some enterprise is getting. You put AI at the forefront. AI is good at scale. AI is good at handling and talking to a lot of people on scale with a similar empathy and of course the similar sort of objection handling. Once that happens, the lower part of the funnel is typically handed over to the human agent, where we as a human excel. We as a human excel in negotiation. We excel in terms of conviction building. So say for example, one very good example that I can give you is if you want to sell an insurance policy, for example, you belong to SBI Life, you are selling an insurance policy. You need to now convert that particular customer by sending him a payment link. And we Indians are very skeptical whenever we are trying to make some sort of a payment transaction. So as a human, I can come into that loop and I try to convince the customer, sir, you trust me. ये policy मेरे पास भी है. Why don't you go it? Please have this. And that is the human touch that we are talking about. So it's not AI. It's not only human. It's the human plus AI augmentation. It's something that we are using as human in the loop to take care of the challenges that you have mentioned.
Right. And while we're on the topic of, tech and your tech stack, I think if you've been following the news today, one of the bigger announcements that has come in the last few hours is, Mira Murati's startup, which is Thinking Machines, has announced their first product, Tinker, which promises to make fine-tuning AI models a really easy task. And, it sort of lets developers handle the data and the algorithms while it takes care of the
Right.
infrastructure. So I'd like to, ask you on that, for a startup founder or for the developers in your team, how difficult is a
Mhm.
task when it comes to fine tuning models, and when you have APIs like Tinker which does most of the heavy lifting, handling the compute and the infra complexities, and developers just need to worry about the data and the algorithms put in. So how important are such frameworks going to be for fine tuning?
No, absolutely. In fact, when I was doing a master's from IIC, so there were a lot of challenges when it comes to training and retraining the models again and again. And a couple of years back, when I think once ChatGPT launched, in 6 months they launched the fine-tuning API. And in order to fine-tune a model, there are like tons of LoRa, QRola algorithms. But in order to do that, you need to build a corpus of around like 10,000 examples in order to fine-tune that particular thing, and that itself would take you 7 to 10 days and even more than that sometimes. So fine tuning
Right.
itself is a very tedious process. What Mira Murati startup is doing in this particular direction is to maybe doing something like what you call as a few shot learning or a one shot learning, where with
Right.
just very few examples you'd be able to fine tune the system in such a way that it is much more aligned to my business goal. If I'm an insurance company, my lingo should be like that, the way that I'm handling objections should be like that. So that is something really wonderful to see coming out of Thinking Machines Lab. We are also very joyous to explore further into it.
Right. And while you have your in-house innovations and the external tools coming in, I'd like to talk about the competitive edge with Vaani.
Mhm.
The conversational AI market is projected to cross somewhat $47 billion by 2030. And of course, you're competing against giants like OpenAI, Google, and Amazon, and as well as all of the other niche startups who have offerings in voice AI. So, Tushar, where
Right.
exactly do you see your defensibility? Does it come from your research DNA or the infra first approach or your early focus on the go to market partnerships? So, how exactly do you address your competitive edge?
So I would say three things. First is, of course, we have a splendid team when it comes to researchers from
Right.
very good institutions. They've spent last 10 years of that life and just researching about high scale infrastructure, foundation models, a lot of
Right.
speech and voice synthesis. So team is something that we're backing big on. The second thing is, I would say, last mile. Solving for last mile was never a priority, and I don't think that would be a priority in the foreseeable future for the giant companies like Google, OpenAI, Microsoft. They'll always partner with some sort of a third party or a system integrator in order to do that. That is where we would excel. And I think the third thing is the speed of it. The bigger the organization gets, the more bureaucratic it keeps on getting. So if there's some feature or there's some use case that we need to deploy for our customers, for our partners, we would be able to do it in just a matter of days, where these companies would take months to do that. So these are a couple of things that we are really doubling down on. I think
Right.
that puts us at a way better place than them.
Right, that's good to know. Tushar, if I'd like to roll back on the entire investor situation with Vapi. So with a lot of AI applications and AI products gaining momentum, somewhat the emotion is that it's getting very easy to build because one, there are a lot of problems out there to solve, and two, it's easier than ever to build a solution with the power of AI in your hands. So, has the demand from investors investing in early stage startups like yours has it been exceeding the expectations of what the founder needs to achieve in an early stage?
Uh, I would disagree, because in fact, it was so hard for us to raise our first round in itself, because there's a ton of competition. But investors usually have a bias of what people are building, what kind of stuff. Because if you just say plain voice AI is a very big umbrella, and
Exactly.
investors find it very hard to differentiate between the companies. They tried to pursue us as another voice AI company, which we were not, and that is why it took us so long to, in fact, raise this small amount in this particular round. So I want to say that of course, a lot of money is flowing into AI and Gen AI startups, but unless and until you have some way or some positioning which stands way apart from the existing players, specifically in a crowded market like voice AI, it would be hard for everybody. And we were very thankful to our investors as well, that they believed in us, gave us the chance to move forward with a strong hypothesis that we had.
Right. So your advice to the founders across the world is just to build a solution that sort of stands very distant from what the common offerings are across the globe. So sort of build something with real
Yes,
distinction.
yes.
Right.
Yeah,
And Tushar,
specifically in
if
crowded
yeah.
market, that's true.
Right, that's true. So Tushar, and what does this mean for the future of voice AI? And personally, to you, what does the future of voice AI look like? Because the text to speech space, or even the speech to speech space, is moving really fast with benchmarks improving, on a monthly basis, and you're developing models designed to surpass current standards in, say, metrics like emotional resonance. So, how do you see this evolving into mainstream applications? We've seen call centers, edtech, health, gaming as some of the potential use cases. So, what exactly is going to define success for Vaani?
Yeah, yeah. I'm very bullish about the future of voice AI. In fact, I'll give you a very quick anecdote. I think last week I connected to somebody from the MSME segment of India. Now, MSME, if I'm not wrong, around drives more than half of the today's economy of India. Most of these people are not comfortable with tons of software that we import from outside. So CRM, ERP, all of these are Western concepts. And the particular person I was speaking to, he runs an elastic manufacturing factory based out of Ludhiana, Punjab, and that man has very good cash flow, which a couple of startups would envy him about. Despite having a very good cash flow, he spends most of his daytime into just chasing people on
Right,
phone, on WhatsApp, on SMS, and these are only three channels that he uses to build his business and grow his business, despite having all of the CRMs and ERPs in the world at his disposal. So if you see, India is a very voice and speech centric market. And even as a chota dukandar or kirana wala in your town, वहां से लेके कोई बड़ा सा businessman, we all run on WhatsApp and speech, because these are very quicker, efficient forms of communication.
exactly.
And that is why maybe tomorrow somebody would come with speech first CRM, a CRM which could be just updated and transacted and maybe observed just with voice. Like there is a CRM talking to me, I could answer what is the sale that I made yesterday, show me my forecasting, all of that stuff. So I have a very high belief that a lot of these amazing a lot of these amazing products would come in near future, in next 5 years indeed.
Right, right. Now, of course, as you mentioned, India has a lot of potential when it comes to AI. So let's say talking about Vaani as India's voice tech movement, right? You've been a part of Google for Startups AI Accelerator and the NASSCOM's Gen AI Foundry. So, these place you at the center of India's AI push. So, what role do you
Right.
see Indian research, policy, and the talent in shaping the next generation of global voice AI infrastructure today?
Yeah, I think we have already missed the dot-com wave. We have missed the mobile wave. In order to build good companies, China has captured a lot of those waves. We
True.
have missed the cloud wave in 2010s. We don't want to miss this particular wave because we have always been a service-based economy. We get projects from the Western countries. We build something and we service them. That is not how things should be always. This is the moment you can build tons of great models, tons of great vertical application layer use cases as well, and you can ship it to the outside world. And in fact, a lot of my founder friends, they do and build a lot of such kind of startups and products, and they try to sell to other markets. So unless and until we start building in India and selling it to outside world, it is very hard for India to make a mark in the global map. And that is exactly that we are also trying to do as a research first company. We want research to happen in India. We want model building to happen in India. We want that entire product end to end getting built in India. Of course, hardware is not something that we can control at the moment, but we would be maybe in the next decade. But if we take care of all of these three, four verticals and try to ship all of that end products to the Western countries, we can get a tons of money flowing inside our economy. So I think if a lot of ecosystem players, if they start focusing on this particular aspect, we would be seeing really good days in coming decade as a country.
Right. And Tushar, I'd like to know your thoughts on for the people who are interested in deploying these voice AI solutions into their product, and they might not be necessarily from a tech background. But there are two sides
Mhm.
to a story because I've heard many people say they'd rather approach a company's customer service with a lot more, promise if they reach out to a human first instead of just going
Right.
to a voice AI chatbot. So, in terms of, so you also did mention that human in the loop is a critical concept in voice AI. So, for founders and owners of business who are leaning into voice AI agents, what would you advise them, or rather, how would you advise them to strike a balance in terms of deployment? Where exactly to deploy voice AI, knowing the capabilities of the underlying AI models today, as opposed to where does a human need to come in and tackle the user's customer, support query?
Right. The funny thing with founders like us is we sometimes we end up solving wrong problems and try to overkill the problems. It's like having a solution in a search of a problem. So even if like voice is not necessary in certain use cases, we just try to force it there. Of course, that is something that we should be refraining from. That is the mistake that we have also made in the past. So voice AI has a couple of categories where it fits perfectly. Of course, contact center is one such category. Voice first app interfaces is another such category. There could be tons of such different use cases. So rather than seeing it from a tech trying to sell it to consumers, we can think it from their perspective. What is the challenge that these businesses are facing and they're unable to handle it with the current resources and workforce that they have? Pick up those problems one by one, maybe from certain vertical or certain niches, and then try to solve it one by one. And that is exactly what we did as well when we were starting the company.
Right. And Tushar, also we did speak briefly about the competition, but let's double click on the
Hmm.
competition that's specific to India. So if I were to think
Right.
of some of the established names in the country, you have Sarvam, Bashni, and some of the other few names that you mentioned. So if you could just double
Mhm.
click on how Vani is aspiring to be different from these existing offerings, and if you could just help our audience and our listeners understand what Vani AI's true distinction is from the existing competition and market specific to our country in India.
Right. There are, of course, tons of startups operating in this area. Sarvam is a well-known name. Smallest is
Yes.
Sudarshan is doing really
Yep.
cool
Yep.
stuff.
Exactly.
Murph is there. There are tons of other startups trying to either build in the infra side or either trying to build for some verticals like banking, insurance, or healthcare, and tons of other verticals. Of course, there is going to be an overlap. The entire voice I field just started a couple of quarters back last and maybe late last to last year. So things will evolve, and market is big enough to at least have 20 such infra companies and maybe 100 such application centric companies targeted towards certain verticals. So differentiator wise, it is not very evident of how different these two companies operating in the infra space in voice AI only are. But eventually, most of that will boil down into taking ownership of certain verticals or certain niches, even when it comes to the infra first providers. So current standouts that we have is, of course, we have our own in-house models, and we're trying to break barriers when it comes to the technological advancements with terms of expressiveness. But when it comes to overlap, the overlap is huge. Let me be very frank. Just because I run a startup, I shouldn't be claiming things which I don't have.
No, that's
But
fair.
eventually, I think 4 or 5 years down the line, most of these things would be very clear to everybody, and there's a very large pie to grab for everyone.
Right. So in the end, it comes out, it just comes around to the niche that you own as a startup. So if I understand
Eventually,
it correctly,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
So Tushar, I'd like to, sort of end this conversation knowing your vision of the overall goal that you're chasing, because you've come from IIT Madras to IISc. You've had a long journey so far, and of course, I'm sure the journey is going to begin now. So I'd like to know your overall vision and your goal, and few years down the line, how do you see Vaani AI, take over the voice AI ecosystem, or eventually, do you think you might see a lot more promising avenues inside voice AI that you would like to pivot and eventually find a niche that you were speaking about?
Yeah, I'm a diehard believer of building in India for the world. So I
Right.
have a very true feeling that we have a ton of talent, but that talent either resides in the service side, or that talent either resides on the application side, the customer experience side. So let Vani build something which can help all of these people. They come up with ideas of what needs to be built, how the customer experience would be, what type of say application that I want to build, a voice first application, and let me provide them with the tools. By doing that, I will be helping them. Of course, I'll be enabling them to build all of those use cases. They don't have to worry about the performance and the production grade functionality. They can take care of the business, but at the same time, it also helps our country, because once I enable them, that guy will go out and sell it to the external world, and that is how you bring money inside the country. So if you see, all of these are interdependent stakeholders in the economy. So that is something that we want to capture more and more market share of in the coming decade.
Right, Tushar. There was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us at AIM Networks. We wish you very good luck and all the best for your journey with Vaani AI.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. It was great discussing with you.
Right. So, right, folks, as you saw, that was Vaani AI's vision for India. So, as Tushar mentioned, there are two aspects to this. One is for building in India for India, which is to cater all of the industry segments, be it small businesses, MSMEs,
Thank
or
you.
the
Bye
big
bye.
businesses that you have. And the second aspect is building from India to the world. So, we at AIM are seeing a lot of startups in this space, and we wholeheartedly wish all the very best for them. And we're the biggest supporters of the ecosystem in India. So we like to see more and more founders join our show so that we can bring their journey to life with you. Right. Right, folks. So now we're going to take a small break before we proceed to more exciting news that we have lined up today. Stay tuned for the show.
We are AIM Media House. Born in Nama, Bengaluru. Built for the world. We make tech make sense. We tell stories that matter. This is the era of AI, and we are the ones telling its story. Think AI, think AIM.
And I have seen this place grow from strength to strength. Speakers, the sessions, and the vibe around that.
Love the vibe. Love to see how big it has gotten over the years.
The largest AI conference in India.
Cypher has definitely attained a cult status.
Artificial intelligence.
AI.
Coexisting.
AI.
We are AIM Media House. Born in Nama, Bengaluru. Built for the world. We make tech make sense. We tell stories that matter. This is the era of AI, and we are the ones telling its story. Think AI, think AIM.
And I have seen this place grow from strength to strength. Speakers, the sessions, and the vibe around that.
Love the vibe. Love to see how big it has gotten over the years.
The largest AI conference in India.
Cypher has definitely attained a cult status.
Artificial intelligence. AI. Coexisting. AI.
We are AIM Media House. Born in Nama, Bengaluru. Built for the world. We make tech make sense. We tell stories that matter. This is the era of AI, and we are the ones telling its story. Think AI, think AIM.
Welcome back to Front Page. I hope all of you enjoyed the conversation with Tushar Shinde. And back to all of the exciting news that we have to share today. And up next, we have OpenAI, the startup. It has touched $500 billion in valuation. Look, in November 2022, when ChatGPT first launched, skeptics mocked it as a toy, and even one engineer called it OpenAI's worst product concept so far. And fast forward to today, that so-called worst idea now powers around 700 million weekly users, processes 2.5 billion prompts a day, which is nearly 29,000 every second. And this has just propelled OpenAI to a $500 billion valuation. So this means that OpenAI is now the world's most valuable startup, and it's overtaken Elon Musk's SpaceX, which stands at $400 billion in valuation. But this isn't just a story about finance. It's about how AI is reshaping industries, geopolitics, and even the entire energy infrastructure. Because take a look at OpenAI's investors. We have SoftBank, Thrive Capital, Dragoneer, Abu Dhabi's MGX, and Rowe Price. And employees had the approval to sell $10 billion plus in stock, but sold far less. And this is being interpreted as a confidence in OpenAI's long-term upside. So let's also take a look at the scale behind the price, because this isn't just speculation alone, and the usage curve is historic. Because as I mentioned, we have 700 million weekly active users on ChatGPT, and we have 2.5 billion plus prompts a day. And that means 29,000 prompts every second. And a $4.3 billion of revenue in H1 2025, and it has already exceeded all of 2024. But also $7.8 billion in operating loss, which is being driven by massive R&D and compute costs. Essentially, OpenAI isn't just running a chatbot, it's running the busiest human-machine interface in history. And more importantly, infrastructure is the key product at OpenAI. And we've covered this extensively on Front Page, which is the $500 billion Stargate project. So OpenAI plus Oracle and SoftBank together are scaling to 10 gigawatts of AI compute. And this is the equivalent of 10 nuclear reactors. So there are 5 new United States sites pushed plant capacity to 7 gigawatts and involving $400 billion in committed investment. So this isn't just a startup anymore, folks. It's an industrial build-out that is shaping the national AI infrastructure. And let's also take a look at Nvidia's $100 billion bet on OpenAI. So Nvidia isn't just selling GPUs, it signed a letter of intent to invest up to $100 billion into OpenAI's energy grid. So the first 1 gigawatt of compute goes live in H2 2026 on Nvidia's Vera Rubin platform. It's vertical integration at a scale the AI world has never seen, and the chip maker and model maker are building the backbone of intelligence all together. And then, of course, there's the Microsoft angle, because OpenAI is converting its for-profit arm into a public benefit corporation and balancing non-profit oversight with the for-profit flexibility. But reports show that Microsoft's revenue share with OpenAI could shrink from 20% to 8% by 2030. And this improves the economics as Stargate and Nvidia's investments reduce the dependency. And not to forget the talent wars. The biggest risk isn't just the cost, it's the talent fight that's going on. Because Meta is offering 9-figure pay packages to lure OpenAI researchers. And Anthropic has surged to a $183 billion valuation. And of course, we have China's DeepSeek that is scaling open source models at lightning speed. So the $500 billion valuation also works as a retention tool, which is rewarding employees to stay as rivals circle. But there's also a little bit of friction. We all know Elon Musk's lawsuit claims that OpenAI has abandoned its non-profit roots. So OpenAI's blunt reply is as follows: "We don't need your trade secrets. We won't be bullied." So the noise is real, but so is the compounding usage. Remember, 29,000 prompts every second. Look, here's why all of this matters. One, infrastructure. AI has moved from apps to trillion-dollar grid projects. And number two, we have the geopolitics factor. Stargate anchors US compute sovereignty amidst the global chip wars. And three, we have the confidence. Employees are refusing to cash out billions, and it shows the belief in OpenAI's path to a trillion-dollar status. In the end, here's our take. From being dismissed as the worst product idea in 2022 to running the busiest interface in history and to becoming the world's most valuable startup at $500 billion, OpenAI is no longer just building an AI chatbot. It's building the infrastructure of intelligence itself. And up next, our third news for the day. Thinking Machines, which is Mira Murati's new AI startup, just unveiled its first product called as Tinker. So it's a Python-based API for distributed LLM fine-tuning. So unlike black box tuning services, Tinker is developer first. And let's tell you why. Because it gives researchers granular control over loss functions, training loops, and data workflows in plain Python, while offloading the heavy lifting of distributed compute back to Thinking Machines services. So Murati calls it the frontier tools with clean abstractions. So you have control over your experiments without the GPU headaches. So it's like infrastructure meets accessibility. And at its core lies primitive commands like forward, backward, and sample for custom training and RL pipelines. And then you also have support for small models to dense mixture of experts models like Alibaba's Qwen 235 billion parameter variant. Then you have the low-rank matrix-based tuning that lets multiple jobs share compute pools for cost efficiency. And it's an open source companion. The Tinker Cookbook, which they've released, with post-training methods contains all of the implementations of the modern architectures. As former OpenAI researcher Andre Karpathy put it, this slices complexity better than upload and wait services because you get 90% algorithmic control and 90% less infrastructure pain. So, top research labs have already shared their first impressions of Tinker. Because before launch, the API was tested at Berkeley, Princeton, Stanford, and Redwood universities. So Princeton Global team, they fine-tuned a theorem-proving model with LORA on 20% of data, and it matched a full supervised training mechanism. And then we also have Stanford Rotsoff lab, and they developed a chemical reasoning jump. IUPAC to formula conversion rose from 15 to 50%. And you have Berkeley Sky RL. It ran an asynchronous multi-agent RL loop, traceable only with Tinker's flexibility. And Redwood Research, reinforcement learning trained the Quen 32 billion model on long context controlled tasks. And researcher Eric Gann said that we wouldn't have trained this project without Tinker. So here's the strategy behind Tinker. Look, Thinking Machines just recently raised $2 billion from A16Z, Nvidia, Axel, and others. So with Murati, John Shulman, and ex-OpenAI talent, they're betting on a researcher-first infra, openness plus public releases, and customizable models instead of one size fits all. And the vision is where a world in adaptability being the mode. So instead of centralizing power in a handful of labs, Tinker lowered the barriers for everybody to run experiments at scale. So here's our final take. This is a philosophy because Mira Murati left OpenAI to build a lab that serves developers and researchers and not just enterprise buyers. While the skepticism was loud, the pattern is quite familiar. Every breakthrough starts mid, mocked, or dismissed until it isn't. So if Tinker proves that their infrastructure abstraction can unleash new state-of-the-art results, Thinking Machines won't just be another AI lab. It'll be the lab that put frontier training into everyone's hands. So let us know what you think in the comments below. And now folks, we have another piece of exciting news because from Bengaluru to PES University to Anthropic, and the company has named Rahul Patil as its new Chief Technology Officer, succeeding co-founder Sam McCandlish, who now shifts into the role of the Chief Architect. Patil, who is a PESET alumni, will now lead Anthropic's entire engineering functions, that is inference, products, infrastructure, and security, as the AI lab races to keep pace with OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and Meta. So as mentioned, Rahul Patil's journey runs from Bengaluru's PES University to a global CTO role at Stripe, with stints at AWS, Oracle Cloud, and Microsoft Azure along the way. So he's known as a cloud and an infra veteran who has scaled critical systems across industries. But let's look at the scale at which Anthropic is operating. Claude's growth is breaking records, from less than 1,000 business customers to 300,000 plus in just 2 years. And revenue has jumped from $87 million in early 2024 to a $1 billion run rate by 2025. And it surpassed $5 billion in August of this year. Besides, 80% of consumer usage now comes from outside the United States, with countries like India, Korea, and Singapore outpacing the American adoption. And this surge has tested Anthropic's infrastructure, even forcing rate limits on tools like Claude Code and Sonnet 4 earlier this year. So Rahul Patil's challenge is precisely going to be this, that is keeping scale reliably Claude safe, fast and global. Remember, Anthropic is also in the infrastructure race. And Anthropic is also restructuring its core technical group, which means tightening the loop between product, engineering, inference, and infrastructure. So McCandlish will now focus on pre-training and large-scale model training. And Patil will inherit the compute and the reliability mandate. Meanwhile, rivals are always raising the bar because Mark Zuckerberg's Meta has pledged a $600 billion infrastructure by 2028. And OpenAI, as mentioned earlier, is scaling to 10 gigawatts under Stargate with Oracle and Nvidia. But Anthropic isn't being left behind because the startup just raised $13 billion at a $183 billion valuation led by Iconic Ventures to stay in the fight. But the story is also about India, and let me tell you why. Patil is among the most prominent Indian origin CTOs in global AI, and India is Anthropic's number 2 market, accounting for 7.2% of global cloud usage. And on October 11th, Anthropic will host its first ever developer event in India, right here in Bengaluru with Axel Ventures. Developers will deep dive into Claude Sonnet 4.5, the company's latest model for coding and reasoning, with enterprise agents and co-pilots as the key focus. And we've extensively covered the Claude Sonnet 4.5 release on front page, breaking down why it matters for coding, agentic AI, and the global infrastructure race. If you missed it, go check it out right now. But in the end, here's why this matters. Look, Anthropic isn't just filling the CTO role, it's doubling down on the infrastructure leadership. And Patil's appointment signals a pivot, stable, enterprise grade engineering to match Claude's surging demand. Look, as the AI arms race tilts towards compute sovereignty, trillion-dollar infrastructure bets, and talent wars, leadership at the engineering core will decide whether Anthropic can hold its $183 billion momentum. So here's our take. From PES University in Bengaluru to scaling Stripe's global cloud infrastructure to now becoming the CTO of one of the most valuable AI labs in the world, Rahul Patil's rise is a story of Indian talent shaping the future of AI. And for Anthropic, it's about whether Claude can not just scale but lead responsibly in a trillion-dollar race. So that's it for today's front page news, folks. We hope all of you enjoyed the exciting developments that happened today. And I'm sure you're going to see tons of messages in your WhatsApp group about Rahul Patil being the Anthropic's new CTO, with all of your uncles and aunts asking, when is your turn? So on that note, I'm going to end the show for today. Remember to like, share and subscribe, and stay tuned for AIM Network for more such streams. Thank you and have a great weekend.